All right, good morning, Peralta. People are starting to enter the webinar room. Good morning. My name is Mark Johnson. I'm the Executive Director of Marketing, Communication, and Public Relations for the Peralta Community College District. Welcome to our webinar on the budget. This is a town hall webinar presenting the draft adopted budget. Before I introduce Chancellor Jackson to kick things off this morning, some housekeeping. This is a webinar format, and we have disabled the chat. If you have any questions that come up during the presentation, please use the Q&A feature, the questions and answers button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can submit the questions. That will allow us to track all of the questions that you ask. Any questions that we don't actually answer during the course of the town hall, we will be sure to get back to you because we have that record of the questions that are asked. So please use the question and answer feature. And with that said, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Jannett N. Jackson. She is the Interim Chancellor of the Peralta Community College District, very experienced Chancellor and Executive Officer in the California Community College System, and we're very lucky to have her. Dr. J, over to you.
Thank you, Mark. And honestly, I did not pay him to say that. So with that, I want to get going. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Town Hall on the FY 2022 proposed draft budget. Before I begin, I'd like to kind of frame the discussion and to reiterate some updates that have happened since our last budget webinar. As part of our realignment of services under the rubric of the FitMat report, as well as our ACC-JC recommendations, specifically guidance that we review the district and the college's duties and responsibilities and identify gaps as part of the development of a functional map. We wanted to complete this prior to submission of our follow-up report due in October of last year, October 1st, but it was too important to just check the box. So we took some more time, we refined the document, and we shared it through the college and district participatory governance bodies. And then we forwarded the functional map to the Board of Trustees for 2 reviews, and it was approved by the board on November 9th of 2021. In response to that, the district administrative team, or DAT team, has been working to align our operations with what was adopted and to make the appropriate changes. So on June 27th of this year, we presented some of those recommendations to the Board of Trustees at their retreat. And as part of that, and all of that information is out there if you want to further review it on the June 27th board meeting. But basically, the Executive Director of Fiscal Services would revert back to its old position, which was the Associate Vice Chancellor of Finance, to align with our Academic Affairs and our Student Success Office. And we also thought that that name should be changed back to what it was, which was Educational Services. And due to that, we also had the board directed us to hire a Deputy Chancellor Chief Operations Officer position, and that's currently being held by Dr. Stephanie Droker. And it was felt that the Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs and Student Success really should be reclassified to an Associate Vice Chancellor, and it would align with the other Associate Vice Chancellor that is in that office, our institutional researcher. The position is being held by Dr. Francisco Herrera. So the Chief of Staff position would be vacated, and that was again based on the FitMat recommendation that we have an in-house counsel. Some of you might remember Thuy Nguyen had that position last. We didn't call it in-house counsel, we called it general counsel. And Royal Roberts Esquire is going to be taking over that position. With those changes, I received a request from Adil Ahmed, who was our interim vice chancellor at the time, that he wanted to go back to his old position, which would be the vice chancellor of finance and administrative services would be that. And he would go back to his old position, which would be associate vice chancellor. So we also made that change. So to be able to accomplish that, I reached out to Dr. Nathaniel Jones, who Dr. Nathaniel Jones III, I'll get the whole name right, Nathaniel, and asked him if he would step in on an interim basis for 6 months. And that is with the option of additional 6 months to guide us through this process of moving from our FTES BAM model to the SCIF model. And so he has accepted that. And so today he is going to be co-presenting with Adil on the current budget for FY 2022 and 23. Before I turn it over to them, I want to emphasize that the district is in a good fiscal position, better than it was 3 years ago. And that we have increased our funding in the form of a raised base by a little over $10 million from the state. But I won't go into all of that detail because there were other changes to the funding model that I believe Dr. Jones will start out, and then we'll take questions if applicable along the way. And we also want to make sure that there's time to answer questions at the end. So with that, I'm going to ask them to do their presentation, and then we will be available to answer any questions. And this is being televised. So those individuals who could not make the meeting today, it will be posted on the webpage, a link to this presentation. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Jones and Adil Ahmed.
All right, very well. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to address you this morning. Thank you very much, Chancellor Jackson, for the introduction. I'll start by saying that I really want to thank and appreciate the finance team for their tremendous work on preparing this proposed adopted budget for our consideration. And so we couldn't be here without their work. And it's really important to note that the 186-page document is a collaboration between finance and the team in marketing and communication. So I want to thank them as well. What you may or may not know is that this endeavor is largely manual. A lot of the data and information has to be compiled together in a manual way. It is not necessarily highly supported by the use of technology. So bear that in mind as we move forward in this conversation. So let's talk a little bit about what did the state approve in the 22-23 budget. And I'm going to just highlight this because I know that you've probably seen a lot of this information before, and so I'm not going to spend a lot of time doing that. But what you may want to note is that the state approved about $4 billion of additional funding for the California community colleges attributable to Prop 98. Now, that funding was in two tranches, as a word to speak, or two buckets. One, ongoing resources, and then two, the one-time resources. 47%, the smaller share, is for ongoing resources, and 53% for one-time expenditures and resources. How are those resources allocated? Well, they were intended to provide funding for certain priorities as stipulated by the governor's office and the legislature. So let's first of all, let's take a look at the ongoing resources. a good bit of the resources is allocated for COLA, cost of living adjustment, almost some $560 million for that. The other large share was allocated to the student-centered funding formula base increase. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in particular. And then there was also resources provided for part-time faculty health insurance. I'm sure many of you have heard about that. And then also $250 million for student success completion grant and the others. Now, when it comes to the one-time funding, largely, a lot of it was allocated to deferred maintenance, or what they call PPIS, which stands for physical plant and instructional equipment. One of the things that's really, really interesting about this pot of money, it also includes, as part of the approved use of these resources, is to fund energy efficiency projects as well, to help us to achieve some of the state's sustainability goals. So that's important to note. The other thing is a large sum of money was $650 million for retention and enrollment related activities in support or in response to the impacts of the pandemic. And you can see some of the other areas that were intended to be used for these resources. So now, before we delve into the proposed 22-23 budget, I want to share a couple of highlights regarding assumptions. So the first thing that I would indicate is that, you know, the data and the information that is presented is based on the enacted budget that passed in June. But there was a revision that came out in August the 22nd, just last week, that provided some update in terms of rates. And so so we will deal with that, and the current projections include those rates. The general assumption is the revenue side includes the 6.56% COLA. Okay. It also, we need to remember that we have to also have our budget needs to reflect an ending balance of 10% or greater in accordance with board policy. So that means we can't have an expense budget such that we reduce our ending balance to the point where it is below the 10%. So we can't do that. So we need to bear that in mind. Also, on the expense budget side, it is projected to show expenses in terms of personnel applied a COLA of 5.6%. There are some other things that we included, like a very, very modest, very small contingency of about $283,000. And it includes some additional resources to buy down some of the institutional liability in the form of bad debt and the OPEC interest costs that we have to pay. So I thought it would be helpful to give you a chronology of some of the things, because some of the changes that you will see are a function of additional information that has occurred in very, very short time frame. So we were working, we got the approved budget at the end of June, early July. We received the joint analysis mid July, and then we were taking that information and began working on preparing the proposed adopted budget. And while all that was going on, very, very late in August the 22nd, we received new rates for the student-centered funding formula. And then on Monday, of this week, we discovered that there was an error made in the calculation for the total computational revenue. And then on the 30th, we just received communication from the State Chancellor's office that validated the revised TCR that we had come up with was in fact the correct one, and I'll go into a little bit of that. So a lot of activity in a very, very short period of time. All right, so as I mentioned before, we received a schedule summary of the total compensational revenue from the state. We received that on the 30th. Today is the 1st, so I think that was Tuesday. So down here in yellow, you will see Peralta Community College District, and I made it larger here so that you can see it more easily. So our total computational revenue for the 22-23 fiscal year is $136,171.044. And that's different than what was previously communicated in the proposed adopted budget. And I will explain that momentarily. So here's what happened. So this is just an excerpt of what we call Schedule C, and it's the latter portion because it has the total for what was calculated in terms of the student-centered funding formula. So you run through the calculation, you see the outcomes, and then you see the rates, and that produces the dollar amounts. Multiply the outcome, time the rate for those outcomes, that produces a dollar amount. So what was done is finance went through, did the calculation, and they came up with a TCR in accordance with the SCIF of $126.8 million. That was absolutely correct, and that was fine. The only caveat was that it was based on the July rates, not the ones that were published in August. Now, then what happened was they looked at the hold harmless from last year, and they made an escalation of the same percentages that were in the rates for the new rates. And then they added that hold harmless to the calculated student-centered funding formula value and came up with a new total computational revenue of $147.8 million. That's where the error came in terms of how they calculated the hold harmless value. Okay, so this is, go to the State Chancellor's website and you'll see it. And this is the Exhibit C for last year. And so this will allow you to understand how we need to calculate the total computational revenue. So total computational revenue is calculated that we receive funding for is the maximum from calculating TCR by 3 different methods. First is by the student-centered funding formula, which I just showed you. The second is by what they call a stability calculation, which is the second line here, where it says 2021 student-centered funding formula calculation, revenue plus COLA. And so what they do is take the previous year's student-centered funding formula calculation, adjust it for the current year's COLA, and they produce a number. And in this case, from last year, it was $113.3 million. Our revenue for under the student-centered funding formula for last year calculated at $109 million. And then they use the hold harmless calculation. The hold harmless calculation is you take your 17-18 TCR and make adjustments for the COLA for each of the years in which COLA was approved to the current fiscal year. So using that methodology, it produced a TCR of $127.78 million. If you look at the budget book last year, it matches that number. That's what we did. Now, the hold harmless is at a value of $18.7 million. How did they get that? They got that by taking the hold harmless calculation and subtracting from it the student-centered funding formula calculation of the 109 from the 127.78. And that gives you 18.78. So I wanted to share that. So now that's what happened last year, and that's how the calculations work. So let's take a look at that with regard to the current budget. So similar process. Take a look at the student-centered funding formula, run the numbers. It produced a value of $129.6 million. Then let's do the stability calculation, which is last year's TCR calculated by SCIF, which was $109 million, escalated by the 6.56 COLA for this year. That gives you a value of $116.2 million. Then apply the hold harmless calculation, which, as we recall, was the 17-18 escalated by the compounded COLAs for the previous years to the current fiscal year. That gives you 136.17. Okay, now our max TCR is the larger of those three values, which is the 136.17. Now, what is the hold harmless? Well, we'll do just like we did before. We'll subtract the student-centered funding formula from the 136, and that is 6.5. So the hold harmless was not the $21 million as was previously calculated, but rather it's 6.5. We had in our adopted budget 147.8 as the revenue, when in fact the real TCR is 136. The difference or the variance is 11.67. So obviously that's an issue. So what we need to do is to look at ways of addressing that. What I want to note before we talk about what some of these possible options for dealing with that is, please be mindful that the $136 million is 9.56 whatever million dollars more than what we received last year. So I think that that's important thing to note. Additionally, we have other restricted funds that have been provided through the state in terms of one-time funding. But this is dealing specifically with the unrestricted general fund component of the budget, which, as we've seen, is overstated by $11.67 million. And so that's the gap that we have to close. And so the board has not decided on how we need to close that gap. But here are a couple of major areas of consideration for how we might do that. One is we can use some HERF funding, increase the amount of indirect, and then also possibly claim some share of lost revenues attributable to a substantial reduction in our non-resident tuition. the federal regs allow us to do that, and we can take fuller advantage of that in order to do that if we wanted to do that. The other things that we can do is we could reduce the amount that is budgeted currently for some of the vacant positions. At estimates, we have over $12 million. I think the actual number is around $13 to $14 million in terms of salary and benefits for vacant positions. So we could budget less for some of those positions to help close the gap. Also, we can decrease the amount of budget that we were intending to allocate to buy down some of our liability in the form of OPEB and for the bad debt. We could also reduce the amount of discretionary budget that we have. And we could reduce the fund balance if we were inclined to do that. And then also there is been a proposal to switch from one health plan to a new health plan. And some of the savings from that could be used to deal with this if it is approved and ratified by our collective bargaining groups. So I know that those conversations are ongoing and we don't have any definitive agreement yet, but nonetheless, those are some of the options we can use. And I think the actual solution will be a combination of several of these items with regard to how might we make those decisions. We would obviously look at trying to minimize adverse impact on the core of the work that we do, which is the instruction of students. And so that's what we would use as a guidepost in terms of making these decisions, I would imagine. So here's the 5-year projection that is reflected in the budget book that we have. And so we would need to update this data once the board gives clear direction on what it is that we would need to do to cure the issue that we have of the 11.66 budget variance. And so what we would do is make an adjustment. So what I've done to give you an idea of what that might look like is that we would need to reduce the revenues to correct the error there. And then we would do an expense reduction to deal with it on the expense side. Now, you might ask, well, why are you showing an expense reduction of $9.5 million as compared to the 11 million? That's a very good question. I'm glad that you asked that. You're very good students. The reason is because if you recall from the previous slide, if I go back, it showed that we would have had an ending balance of $2.7 million with the proposed expenses there. So essentially, I'm capturing that that positive variance and reducing the amount of reduction in the expenses so that we don't have to make additional reductions there. And you can see that the projected new net value is only about 600,000 as compared to the 2.7 million that was in the previous budget 5-year projection. Once we know what the specific reductions are, then a more appropriate, more specific 5-year projection will be calculated and reflected, but I needed to show at least what the numbers would look like in an aggregated manner. So I showed that, but it's in gray because the real fine tuning in terms of those other numbers on a line item by line item basis is not correct, but needs to be dealt with. So I just kind of aggregated it by showing those two reductions as a general number applied to the totals, not the specific areas. All right. All right. That's it in a nutshell. We're happy to answer any questions that you may have at this time. I hope I didn't go through that too quickly for you, but I would happily answer any question, as well as my colleague, Adil Ahmed. And I'll continue to share just on the off chance that someone wants me to go back to a particular slide.
Mark, you have, first of all, thank you, Dr. Jones, and the other members of the finance team are also here as panelists if there's any questions that either Dr. Jones, myself, or anyone else can answer. So Mark, do you have any questions that have come in that we need to speak to?
Yes, yes, Chancellor, there are questions about the succession at College of Alameda and what that process looks like.
All right, I will be making a decision on the succession at College of Alameda. Hopefully announcement will go out today. I have done extensive due diligence in terms of the selection. I want to make sure that we have what is needed. I do not want to disrupt the college any more so than I already have. But I do believe that with the acceptance by Dr. Jones to help guide us through this, and I will say this, that Nathaniel is also on the state board of CEOs that is looking at the SCIF. So he has a unique perspective that I think will help guide us as we move from our current allocation, as I indicated before, to our SCIF allocation and our resource allocation model, which we will be addressing at the upcoming PBIM. Regarding the decision, I'm looking at just keeping it in-house. I'm not looking at going external. And like I said, I've done a lot of due diligence, touch bases with a lot of people within the district to get their feedback, interviewed the vice presidents. That's why I'm looking internally for that. And as I said, I'll be making a decision this afternoon so that will be, I think, less disruptive than if we bring in someone external to the institution for 6 months, which is what an acting appointment is for 6 months, with the possibility of extension for another 6 months.
Great, thank you, Chancellor. There's a question about the QA configuration. The short answer is I'm not sure how to change the settings on the Q&A to make them visible to all.
Well, we decided not to do this, and I've said this before, and I'll repeat it again. Hopefully this one is recorded. We tried doing that initially, and what was happening is some people were posting things in Q&A, some people were posting them in chat. We were trying to answer as we were going through. So comments that were being responded to in chat were not being reflected in the Q&A. And so people were getting upset, thinking that their questions weren't being answered. It was really a mess. And this was the first one that we did. And I decided that for ease of operation and the fact that we would be capturing those if they're in the Q&A and can answer them later. And after every meeting, we've had that posted as Q&A so that people can see what those questions were and also can see what the answer was. But we really got into a conundrum when we were trying to do both of those. And it really wasn't, I think, feasible to do both in this kind of setting when you have multiple questions. And some of those questions are very pointed, and some of them really, I don't feel that we need to answer in an open forum because they're not trying to get to an answer. It's really to poke at individuals. And so I think that that's the best way for us to move forward on this.
Great. Thank you, Chancellor. Let's see, there's a question from asking how we can get a recording of this. So this is this webinar is being recorded. We will post the recording on Peralta's YouTube channel. We're also routing it through to Peralta's cable access TV station, Peralta TV, where it's available on channel 27 and 28 on Comcast, depending upon which city in our service area that you live in, or on channel 99 if you have AT&T. This will also be broadcast on Peralta's radio station, KGPC, low power FM station. So it will be made available in multiple places. The draft adopted budget PDF is posted on the Peralta website, www.peralta.edu, in the finance department. Click the link for the budget in your right-hand column, and you can see it posted there. I've shared the link out through chat as well. Let's see. We have a question about classified salaries and how classified salaries are behind at Peralta compared to other Bay Area 10 colleges. Would you care to comment on that situation, please?
I would say that that is an accurate assessment. We have conducted a classification study, and based upon that classification study, there was a presentation by our Dr. McKinley made a presentation on that. We've also had discussions with that with the Peralta Classified Senate, and shared some recommendations that we'd like to move forward with to bring more in line what our salaries are with individuals here at sister colleges. But to be able to do that, we have to have ongoing funds. And so we started looking at options of how we can have some savings and then turn those savings into an increase in salary, base salaries. One recommendation, and it's been put out to the district-wide, has been to look at going to a new health insurance plan with Alliant. And based upon the actuarial study that was completed and based upon our review of it, we've been taking that out. We've met with the Retirees Association on a couple of instances. We've made presentations at the campuses. We made a presentation to the board regarding this. And with the projected savings, ongoing savings, if we move to a new health insurance plan, it's estimated that it could be anywhere from, I think, 3.3 or 3.2 million up to $5 million. And with that, that would allow us to do across the board increases in salaries. And I think right now the projection was about 3%. But that was why in the one slide that I think Dr. Jones showed you, there was a question mark. And if you could go back to that slide with the options, that is why it's question mark, because it has not been approved yet. So until that is approved, it's the one in the lower right-hand corner. And the savings from the adopting the proposed benefit plan would change. And those savings would then be moved over to base salaries for our classified professionals. And that would be in addition to any cost of living increase.
Great, thank you, Chancellor. Let's see. PFD President Jennifer Shanowski has a hand raised. I'm going to allow you to talk.
Thank you so much. I have actually a couple of questions. First, I think some things have been represented today that do not accurately reflect the experience of faculty and staff, especially at COA. So I'm really concerned about that process. And while the Chancellor has the ability to appoint whoever she'd like, I would hope that there is a robust discussion with stakeholders, as we are being led by an administration that has been directly appointed almost completely. I also want to point out that faculty salaries are the lowest in the state as well. The final thing is, I wanted to mention that at Monday, PFT was negotiating, an offer was retracted, which is regressive bargaining and is illegal. And then we're told that we need to, hurry up and get a deal for these budget savings for benefits. And I just want to be clear that this is the first time we're really seeing this budget, and I hope that we're given the ability to actually really engage with the numbers and the entire booklet before really important decisions are made about the state of our district, including salaries and benefits. Thanks.
So let me just comment on a couple of things that you said. I'm not sure what you mean when you say the entire College of Alameda administrative was directed, because my understanding was that unless you're speaking beyond the top
I wasn't saying
four
the
people,
college.
can I finish?
Sure, but that's not what I said.
Well,
Sure.
you indicated that College of Alameda is almost completely direct appointments.
No, the district
now-
administration.
Okay, well, we'll listen to it and see if that is indeed what you said, but that's probably what I heard. So the president, Dr. Jones, went through a process and was permanent. The vice president of instruction went through a process and is permanent. The vice president of student services went through a process and is permanent. And the vice president of administrative services went through a process and is permanent. So I'm not sure.
With all due respect, maybe that's what you heard, but that's not what I was asking. I was referring to the district office where all.
Oh, okay, you
chancellors,
said
the deputy
College of
chancellor-
Alameda. I'm sorry.
Well, I was referring to the College of Alameda process, but if I misspoke, I definitely apologize, but I was referring to district administration.
Okay, all right.
Thanks.
District administration, there was a comment that was made in the public that everyone at the district office that is an interim did not go through a process. And I will tell you that I did go through an interview process. And in fact, I believe Dr. Shanowski, you were on that when the decision was made to offer the interim position to Dr. Walters. When Dr. Walters then subsequently resigned, I was the next candidate and the board offered that position to me. So I'm not sure what happened before I got there, which was April 16th of last year. Since there were already interim appointments there, I can't speak to that. I can only speak to my position.
Great, thank you, Chancellor. We have a couple of different people asking the same question, which is circling back about the timeline of the follow-up process on when the updated draft budget will be available and what the process is for approval, being when that would go to the Board of Trustees.
Okay. The first reading of the proposed draft will be on the 13th of September. At that time, the discussion will be in open session. It is not a closed session item. And we will be looking at the options that you see in front of you on this slide to make some recommendations to the board, but ultimately it is the board's budget. And so those things can be adjusted. We will also now, this is the first town hall, as you noted in the or as Dr. Jones noted, we only got the changes, the printed document from the state on the 30th. And so this is the first. So you're getting it fresh off the press, so to speak. The adjustments that were done, I think Dr. Jones again explained those. It was an honest mistake. And it's good in one way and bad in another. One, it tells us that our internal controls are working and we caught it before we move forward with making decisions with the bargaining units. And to my knowledge, the only TA that we have is with Local 39. We're still in the discussion phase with the other unions. So I don't think that we're at the stage of having a technical agreement that can then be put to vote. So just a clarity on that also. So basically the buck stops with me. I am the one that is the CEO for this district. I feel that it was my responsibility to give you this information to the best of my ability, using my subject matter experts to explain it, to have this recorded so other people can see it, to take your questions. But ultimately, it's my job to do that, good, bad, or indifferent. As the CEO for this district, I am the fiscal monitor and I supervise all of the staff. So yeah, we did. We do, as my son likes to say, a FUBA, but we have gotten it right. And to ensure that we got it right, we got documentation, and it's part of this presentation. And you can also go out to the state office and you will see that the numbers are the same. So we are now moving forward with this revised revenue, but we have been fairly prudent so that we are not, and I want to point that out, we are not looking at laying people off. In the past, if we had $11 million deficit, we would be looking at that, but we have been taking those actions and making sure that we are sound financially. So we're not looking at laying people off. And in fact, we have a $10 million increase in our revenue based upon the base increase that the state gave us. So we're not, I said to one individual, I don't want people to run away with their hair on fire that, oh my God, the sky is falling. What are we going to do? We have some very prudent, measured steps that we've aligned and put out in front of you now. We haven't said we're going to use this much in her funds, or we're going to use that much to reduce the OPEB liability, because frankly, we've had 2 days to try to come up with a plan. So between now and the 13th of September, that is what we will be presenting to the board, and it will be an open session and anyone can log on. It's still going to be via Zoom. And you will also be able to comment between now and then. You'll be able to comment after that because the board is looking at this twice. It's looking at it on the 13th of September, and then it's looking at adopting it on the 26th of September. And we have to do that by law. So we are being as transparent as possible so that everyone understands. There's no, what's behind the curtain. We are giving it to you as we got it, which is basically information that's 2 days old. So I wanted to make sure that we didn't just go over, we had planned to go over the presentation that was made to the bargaining units on the 22nd. The 22nd is when the state sent out its compendium, which is guidelines for computing the allocations. That was done that same day that the proposed adopted budget was being presented to our bargaining units. Subsequent to that, as indicated in the slide that shows you the dates, was when we got the other information and realized that we had made a mistake. and that we had to make adjustments accordingly. So what you see are options. There may be some more, but in 2 days, these are the options that we've come up with. We have a little bit more time to refine those and to actually put some scenarios together so that we can come up to that bottom line of a little over 11 million. So hopefully that helps everybody to understand where we are. And this is the first time that there's been a change to the calculations. Previous to that, as we showed you, our calculations were sound and they align with what the state. This year, for the first time, the state increased our base and they looked at a different formulas with percentages, and that's where the mistake was made. So hopefully everyone understands that. I've had a lot of individuals calling, asking about the budget, but I wanted to wait and present it to everyone so that everyone heard it and saw it at the same time. I apprised the board of this once we knew that there was a problem, and we've discussed some options, but again, nothing is in concrete. I can't tell you we're going to reduce the fund balance. I can't tell you about how much we're going to reduce positions and freeze positions, because we still need to figure that out. That's where we are right now.
Great. Thank you, Chancellor. Jeff Sanseri at College of Alameda and with the PFT has a hand raised. So I'm inviting Jeff to speak. You have the floor.
Hello, Mark. Thank you. I'm also with the District Academic Senate. Chancellor, I understand you're as you said earlier, you're the CEO and then the buck stops with you. I'm not sure I agree, but I guess my question would be what role in these kind of decisions that you make does participatory governance play, in all the makings of these decisions, if I can just repeat myself.
Well, I always go back to this, Jeff, is our participatory governance system allows for recommendations. Ultimately, decisions are made by the board. So I'm always clear when people say, what role do we play in decision making? You make recommendations towards that. And those recommendations usually are taken forward to the board. Sometimes they are not if they're so far left or far right. And believe me, I hear some of those too. So we try to, in our governance bodies at the district level, we have the PGC, which is basically, I guess if I could equate it to something at the campus, it would be the President's Roundtable or the President's Council. That's what I have. And that was really determined under a previous chancellor. I think it was Dr. Laguerre created the PGC when I was doing my research and finding out how we worked within our system. And then we have other district-wide committees. The newest one is the Holistic Planning and Safety Committee that was just approved in March of this year by the PGC. And I encourage individuals that are interested, it is out there. Please check. And I also presented it in my Flex Day report. So you can go to that report, which is also posted. So we have the Technology Committee district-wide that looks at technology issues and makes recommendations. We have our Planning and Budget Committee that looks at this and would be reviewing this. And we have our PVIM, which is coming up, and we're also going to talk about it on the 16th, which is before the board will adopt the budget on the 26th. We have at that time, we called it our Academic Affairs and Student Success Committee that looked at instructional as well as student services recommendations. We have our district-wide facility committee that looks at facilities. And then do we have one more or am I missing? Did I get everything? Facilities.
You might have been missing the Senate.
The Senate, I meet with Donald. And one of the things that he and Donald and I meet on a regular basis, as much it's not like every Thursday or, once the third Thursday of the month. It depends on schedules, but we meet on a regular basis. And I've also met with all of the district academic senate presidents, and we've had discussions about DMC and the district educational enrollment management committee. So those doors are always open. Donald and I have talked about maybe on our meetings expanding it so it's not just one-on-one, he and I, but really inviting the other academic senate presidents to be a part of that. And we have had a couple of meetings like that. They've mostly been, single topic meetings, but it could be open like I do with the classified senate. With them, they create a budget. We're talking budget, so that's in my mind. They create an agenda, we talk about it. If it's something, they try to get it to me in advance. So if it's something that is in the purview, say, of HR, I invite the vice chancellor of HR to attend. If it's facilities, I invite facilities, that type of thing. But we haven't decided for this year. But if that's something that the academic senate would like to do, I'm not opposed to it, because that's what I do with the classified senate. I meet with the senate officers from each campus. So that is how that has been working. And our PGC looked at the budget. I believe it was presented to them, Adil, even though it's been revised now at the last minute. There are a lot of things in that 100-page plus document that are still accurate. So that's why we put it out there, because the items that you saw today are the items that are being adjusted or being considered for adjustment based upon our miscalculation of what our revenue was going to be. Does that kind of help a little bit? Did that answer your question?
To me?
Or is there more?
No, I guess what I was getting at was just that I think that, like, with a lot of things that are happening, it just kind of feels, and perhaps I'm alone on this, but it feels that, like, faculty are in the dark, or they kind of find out at the 11th hour. And again, I refer back to, like, the situation at College of Alameda where I teach history. I don't know anything until either I push really hard, or it's like after it's already happened. So I guess faculty input and faculty, like, gathering or gaining of information was really what it came down to.
Yeah.
But I think as far as your answer goes, I think you pretty much answered my question.
Okay. And I will say that I received IVC Adil Ahmed's letter on the 1st of August. And so we don't have any meetings usually in August. And when I've tried to, bridge that gap of where faculty are not here, and I've kind of been tapped on the hand and said, wait a minute, faculty aren't here. Their contract doesn't start until this date. It's kind of hard. And then when faculty aren't here, I sent out, frankly, I sent out a kind of a let's vote by mail kind of thing to ask people to vote on certain things. And again, that was met with resistance. So if you have an answer for how to do that, I would be more than willing to listen and try to bridge that gap. But like we said, we found out about this basically over the weekend, this last weekend. We're not talking weeks. We would not have published a budget book and put that much time into it if we had thought that there would be a last 11th hour, as you say, changes. But there were. We missed them, frankly, and we are where we are. But I don't think it's cause for, like I said, running with your hair on fire that, oh my God, the sky is falling. We're taking a very deliberate approach, and we will let you know what those recommendations are and seek your input on those. But we are trying to stay as far away from the classroom as possible. That has been the guidance that I've gotten from the board. That is what I believe in, because I've been on that other side of being at a campus when we did have to lay off people, and I do not want to do that. So I want to say that again so people understand that is not an option that you see up here, is layoffs. Okay.
Thank
I
you, Chancellor.
wanted to jump in, if you don't mind. I wanted to make a couple of points very, very clear. One is that we literally just found out. We are now at Thursday, and it was confirmed that we had an error on Monday. So to respond and to be able to put something together and to share it with the community, I think indicates a sincere desire for transparency. No one is hiding anything.
Yeah.
That's one point. Number two is the reality is whether or not the mistake happened or not, all PCD would have gotten in terms of TCR is $136 million. End stop. That's it. That's what we were entitled to get. That's what we are getting. Anything else doesn't matter. We put the wrong numbers in, yes, but all we really ever were going to get was $136 million, okay? And that's the reality. We can adjust the numbers, but that's all we were ever going to get. So I don't want us to think that, oh, we had $147 million and now we don't. No, we never had $147 million. Okay, all we were ever going to get was $136 million. And so we really, really need to think about, okay, that's the reality. And it was never deposited into our accounts or anything like that. So we really just need to think about, okay, how do we realign our expense budget to reflect the true revenue in terms of unrestricted general funds that we're going to have? And we're early in the fiscal year. So it's not like we amass all of this expenses and now we have to figure out, oh, how do we cover this expenses because we thought that our revenues were going to be a lot higher and we've done all this spending and things like that. No, that's not where we are either. So I think we need to remember where we came from and really contextualize our understanding of this situation.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Jones. So we're at 11:04. We have a few questions left. Chancellor, would you like us to continue and get these questions answered?
If we can, I don't want to leave anything on the table. If we can get that done like in the next few minutes, Mark.
Of course.
I don't know how in depth the answer would be until I hear the question.
So we have 3 kind of questions and comments from classified professionals. So I think I can kind of combine them. First of all, is a clarification from SEIU President Richard Thole, who just wanted to be clear that the negotiation on salary is to be done with SEIU and not with the classified senates, which is a very good point. Well taken.
Good point. And it was a question that was asked in a discussion, and I mentioned that to Roberto, who had a SEIU sign up that this is speaking to the classified senate. So thank you, Richard.
Yes. So the other kind of questions are about resourcing, filling vacant classified positions, and also a question about the savings from the health plan and how it can fill the gap in our budget and help with salary increases.
All of the above. I think we've been very clear on that. In every forum that I've spoken to, the reason that we even started looking at insurance was because of the premium costs that we're paying for insurance right now. And in my one-on-one discussions with Dr. McKinley, he said, you know, we're a small cog in a big wheel. We need to attach ourselves to a larger entity because there's savings in numbers. And I said, will you please look at that? Because if we can show some ongoing savings, then we can address that with our low base salaries for our employees. And oh, by the way, the savings that I spoke of, the 3% is not just for classified, it's across the board. So it's for faculty as well. So that 3% applies to them. So you're absolutely right, whoever asks the questions. We're looking at that. If the higher numbers are accurate with the actuarial study, and we won't know until we start going through the process, we'll start with the base of the 3.2 or 3.5, whatever it is. I know it's 3+ million. That is the base that we could see in savings. And it could go as high as 5. But we won't know until we actually put it in place, and we can make adjustments. And I will say, well, no, I won't say, because we're still in negotiations. I'll just stop at that. Hopefully that answers the 3 questions. But yes, that's what we're looking at. Those savings is in the area of salaries across the board, and also not still maintaining the same level and degree of service. And if there are, I know there's been some questions, specific questions from our retirees, and we are looking at building in, if, for example, the new plan doesn't have something that you've had for the last 15, 20 years, that will be a one-off. And the district is committed to addressing that.
Thank you, Chancellor. We have a question about the FTES and FTEF numbers that are using for the projections. Do we know what the source is for those, or can we share what the source is for those?
I can't go into detail on it because it involves a lot of calculations, and then it also involves working with okay, let me jump back a little bit, give you the big picture so you can see where we are now. At one point, we did have a DEMC, a District Enrollment Management Committee. And that committee decided that once we developed a plan, an enrollment management plan, there was no need for that committee to continue. That was prior to me getting here, I don't know, years from what I understand. So what fell to determining what the FTES and the FTEF was to the office at the time called Academic Affairs and Student Success. The individual who was in that position for the last 5 years was Dr. Brown. She worked looking at the budget with finance. She looked at the recommendations, and I'm saying this because I'm getting it secondhand, but this is how it was explained to me. She looked at the recommendations that came from FitMat, and if you go to the FitMat report and you look under HR, you will see that the recommendation is to align our FTES and FTES. That was a recommendation. So looking at that, looking at the gap that we showed you on previous slides about where the FTEF was and where the FTES was, and the gap kept getting bigger and bigger. So we had to address that. So we look at that. We talked to the vice presidents, both vice presidents of student services and the vice presidents of instruction, to look at what are some critical things that they feel that they need to have and build that in. We also look at our parcel tax, because the parcel tax is additional funds that we have in, and they can be used for FTEF. They can be used for support services also, as long as it's supporting instruction. So take all of those things together, all of those considerations together, and then come up with some recommendations. Recommendation is made to me. I review those recommendations based upon that. And then in the past, that's how it's been adopted. This last year, because we started to try to trim that down, there was kind of a uproar of how could you, Chancellor, make that decision without input? Well, so the presidents, the District Academic Senate met with the presidents, myself, and key individuals on district staff to look at resurrecting the DEMC. It was recommended that we use it through the shared governance side of the house versus then trying to codify something and put it in a collective bargaining agreement. And that's where we are right now. Long, short answer.
Great. Thank you, Chancellor. We have a question that's not related to the budget per se, but it's a request for remote work policy. And is there any progress on the telework proposal?
That is part of the bargaining that is taking negotiations that are taking place right now.
Great. Thank you, Chancellor. There's a question about health insurance, and does Peralta support CalCare or Medicare for all?
I can't answer that question. That's something that we'll have to get back to you. Unless somebody knows the answer that's online. I'm not sure. That isn't my area, and I don't want to speculate.
Great. Thank you, Chancellor. We'll follow up on that. Last question we have open is about the PBIM schedule, and has the PBIM schedule for 22-23 been created yet? And if not,
we have a draft. It was submitted to me, and with all of the things that have come up in the last 3 days, and I was in the process of changing things around. Now I want to give more time to the budget than was allocated before when we do our report outs. And I also want to give some time for the breakouts, a little more time for the breakouts for people to establish goals for next year. So I do have the PBIM agenda on my desk. I'm going to look at it. I'm going to try to finish it today, send it out to Shetta and also to Donald for their review and whatever modifications, and get it out tomorrow.
Great. Thank you, Chancellor. That's it for the questions. There's Rajiv has the hand raised. So I'm letting Rajiv talk. Rajiv, are you there? You had your hand raised?
Maybe he had to leave.
Okay.
All right. I know that we've gone over our time. I want to thank everybody that attended. I see the numbers are starting to go down with people leaving. So I want to bring this to conclusion. But I just want to reiterate a couple of things. Again, we got $10 million more than we got last year. That's a positive thing. We are moving forward with the hires of faculty. We had 11 hires that were funded by the state. We're moving forward with those this year. We are taking a look at the budget in terms of staying as far away from the classroom as possible, because that is who we are. We provide services to students, both in classroom and out of the classroom. So we're taking a very deliberate look at all of those options, and there may be some that we didn't even think of that you may think of, that you can be free to let us know as we go through these deliberations. And we will be discussing this at the next board meeting, which is scheduled for September the 13th. So thank everyone. We are trying to be as transparent as possible. And with everyone working together, I think that we can get over this. It is not insurmountable. It just means that we need to do some things that we needed to do anyway. We just didn't think we'd have to do them in such a truncated period of time. So thank everyone. Appreciate your continued support. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Chancellor. We will be posting the YouTube video. We'll also be posting a link to the slides that were presented today. So stay tuned for an announcement with that information. Thank you all. Happy
Thank you,
September.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.